What's up, folks, and welcome to Retro Ramble. So, we've talked about a lot of different retro collections on this channel over the years. Most of them actually not bad, though a couple were less than great. And, well, this is probably the most important one that I have talked about up until this point. And I'm a little late to the party on this one in terms of getting the video out, but I really wanted to put some time into it before I showcase it to you guys. So, as you can see, this is Atari 50. And the reason I say this one is important is that it's not only a massive collection of games, and they're not only very well emulated, this game is an interactive museum, effectively, that talks about the history of one of the most iconic and original brands in gaming on their 50th anniversary, hence the name. And this comes to us from Digital Eclipse, which are one of the god-tier developers of retro collections like this, along with M2 and Code Mystics. Those are the three, that's the trifecta of awesome, and Digital Eclipse has always kind of led that. And they have really shifted their focus the last little while to preservation and education about retro games as well, in addition to just being one of the best retro collection packers that there ever was. And this collection is fascinating. It's not cheap. I'm going to tell you that right now. Now, you're getting a lot for it. There's a lot of games in here, which I will show you, and a lot of other content as well. But it is expensive, and I think that this collection is not only good, but it's important. Because a lot of people who play games these days, I would say probably even the majority, never grew up with this stuff like I did, and like maybe you did. And it's important. One of the reasons I like to showcase retro games on this channel is that I feel it's very important to showcase where games came from, because all of this stuff, even going back this far, influences what we have today in terms of gaming. And as someone who loves both new games and old games, I think this is very important. And I think that largely they've done an incredible job of that here, and something that I hope we get to see a lot more of. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comments. Are you interested in the history? Are you here for just the games? You know, what do you think of collections like this in general? I'd like to talk about that. So leave your thoughts down below. So, one of the things I like the most is that when you jump into this, it doesn't take you to the games list. It takes you to this history menu where you can jump through different eras. By the way, there are chapter skips down below, so if you're interested in only the games or only the history or something else, you can feel free to jump around if you like. So we're going to get into this, but you're probably asking first off, how many games we got in here? I usually list these off. I can't possibly here. Why? Wait for it. There you are. There are the better part of 100 titles in this package. All the way from Atari's earliest arcade games up to the Jaguar, which is the first time ever that you've been able to play Jaguar games legally in a collection like this. Plus, there's a bunch of other platforms as well. I think this is also the first time there's been an Atari Lynx collection as well. Jaguar is a platform that doesn't even have very good community emulation for it right now. And the Digital Eclipse guys actually wrote their own emulator for this, and it's bang on, just like most of their other ones, which is fantastic. So, a lot of opportunity in here, and yeah, a lot of games. Now, some of these are duplicates, as in, it's like, there's multiple versions of Centipede in this from multiple consoles. Things like that. But there's still a huge pile of unique titles in this. And it's really, really impressive how much they've packed into this thing. And you can, at any time, go into the games list and just go through these. Or you can get to them organically via the sort of history lesson section. In addition to everything I've shown you here, you might have seen right here, way back at the beginning, you have what's called the Reimagined section. This is a handful of games that Digital Eclipse has modernized. So they've taken the original versions, all of which are in this collection as well, and made their own 2022 versions of them. So you have a version of Haunted Houses, and these play very differently from each other, from the original versions in some cases. You got a new version of Breakout. You've got Quadra Tank, which is kind of like a mashup of tank and combat. There's also some prototypes and unreleased titles in this, including this one. The Sword Quest series was a series of early RPGs for the Atari 2600, and the fourth game in the series never came out back in the day. And Digital Eclipse actually basically made their own version of what they thought the fourth game would be, blessed by the original author, which is pretty awesome. This sort of Simon Says toy that Atari made, they actually have a version of this that you can play. This is a new game that's sort of a mashup of multiple other ones that's really cool. And this, which is one of my favorite 2600 games, is a remastered version of Yar's Revenge that has a new coat of paint on it, but actually runs on the original source code. So it plays exactly like the original, it just looks a lot better. And then we have all the other platforms as well. There's a lot in here. And even if you just wanted the games alone, there is hours and hours of stuff in here. So, yeah, I wanted to show you that. We'll go through the games a little bit, but next up, I want to talk about the history thing, because this is where old school retro nerds like me really geek out. So, as you can see, I've gone through the whole thing. It shows you how much you've looked at in every section. So you've got Atari's origins as a company, which was back in the old school arcade scene, the start of the console generation. They were not the first console, contrary to what a lot of people think, but they were very early on. You have the era of the video game crash of the 1980s. You have the dawn of home computers, which Atari was also a fairly large player in, though never the dominant player. And then you have the 90s and beyond. So Atari is a company that has a very interesting history. This only covers up to the 90s and beyond, because the Atari name, after the original incarnation of the company died, has been passed around like a baseball card for a lot of years. A lot of different companies have owned it. Not all of them have done great things with the name. Some of them have done pretty scummy things with it, frankly. Their own console, cryptocurrency, themed hotels, and hats with Bluetooth speakers in them. Yes, that's a real thing. They are occasionally getting some new video games made. And Atari was recently purchased by a businessman who has several different interests in video games. He's a youngish guy named Wade Rosen. I can't actually find much info about him, but apparently he has a stake in Ziggurat Interactive and some other companies as well. And he recently bought Atari, and he's very much about preserving and utilizing the legacy of the company. And he was the one who, when Digital Eclipse came to Atari and said they wanted to do this, he was the one who was like, yes, let's do that. And he was really, really up on this. So it doesn't talk about any of the turmoil that Atari's experienced between the 90s and up to this point. It only talks about the original incarnation of the company. But here's how it goes. So it's all done on a timeline, and this is what's really cool. So there are a ton of different photos and images and sort of memorabilia. There's manuals, there's flyers, there's all kinds of other promotional stuff in here, all very, very high quality resolution scans. As you can see, you can zoom in really far on it. You can turn the captions off if you want and hide the controls if you want to be able to see everything like that. It's all super high detailed scan, really, really gorgeous. You know, for a retro collection about the 2600, a lot of people gawk at the fact that this game is 12 gigs, which everyone's like, what? And it's partially because of these and partially because of the videos as well, which we're going to get to. So, you know, do they have everything that Atari ever made in here? No, they don't, but they have a lot of things. And wherever the games fit into the timeline or the remakes, you can go here, you can either look at it or you can jump right in and play it. We'll do the games in a separate section. So there's little bits of trivia like this and other images as you go, but in certain sections there are also videos. And these videos are incredible. Now, I'm not going to play a lot of them here because I don't want to give too much away, but I'll play a little bit of this so that you can get an idea, and then I'll talk about it some more.
Some reason I'm looking through the San Jose Mercury in the just random stuff section for sale. And I see world's first video game computer space. No price, just call. I'm like, wow, I'm pretty interested in this. So I called the guy. I said, so you got a computer space? Yeah. He goes, yeah. First game ever. Okay, great. What color is it? And he goes, well, what color do you want? I'm I'm like, wow, this is getting very interesting, because who has a whole bunch of computer spaces, and who would know that they came in all these different colors? He goes, I got a yellow, a solid blue, metal flake blue, and metal flake red. And he goes, a whole bunch of other games too. Okay, great. Want to come up and see them. These were in a Quonset hut on a sunflower seed farm off of Highway 80 in Dixon, California, halfway between, you know, the Bay Area and Sacramento. And these things hadn't been moved in, you know, probably since 1975. And so I got in touch.
So that gives you a little idea here. All of these videos are produced by Giant Bomb alum Drew Scanlon, who used to do some really cool stuff there. And he worked on all of these, and there's interviews with a whole bunch of different Atari legends, different game designers, hardware engineers. They do talk to Nolan Bushnell, the original founder of Atari, a little bit. They talk to a whole bunch of different people and about not only the games themselves, but some of the culture around Atari and the company and its legacy and what they feel it meant to video games. And it's a really, really well done thing. There's about an hour of footage in here. I'm not gonna lie, I would love to have seen the actual full uncut interviews in here, as well as these clips that are based around certain subject matter that they're talking about. I don't know if they'd want to release that as DLC or something. I would actually pay extra for that. Just the whole interview from front to back, all the nuances, all the detail, everything, no cuts. I'd love to see that. I know that's asking a lot, but you know. So you can go through all of these different eras and see all of these different things. They have some old commercials in here, actual TV ads. They have all of these super high resolution scans of the box arts that are 3D modeled, so you can look at, you know, go around and rotate them. It's just so lovingly done, and this timeline menu is really slick. It's easy to navigate. You can jump around between the different eras and points within the era super easily. All of these little icons here show you what you've looked at and what you haven't, so that if you missed anything, you can go back and find it if you like. It's just something that you can tell was made by people who not only understand good UI design, but who are passionate about this. That's what I love about Digital Eclipse. Digital Eclipse products never feel like they're made for a paycheck. They always feel like people who, like the stuff that they're making are made by people who love what they do and do it out of passion, but also happen to get a paycheck out of it. There ain't nothing wrong with that, right? But you just, maybe it's just because I've been around the block of video games for so long, but I have a sixth sense where I can really tell if something was made with passion, and that's what this feels like, honestly. So you can spend a long time in here going through all of this different stuff and playing all these different games, including some of the prototypes that are in here and the unreleased titles. Now, everything in here for the most part is Atari first party, i.e. games that were made by Atari. There was an amazing number of games on their platforms by companies like Activision, iMagic, games like that. You're not going to see any of those because they were not made by Atari, and they would have had to license that. The one exception is the Miner 2049er series. Now, I heard on a podcast, Mike Micah, the president of Digital Eclipse, talked about this. This was not made by Atari. This was made by a software company in Van Nuys, California, actually. And this is arguably not the best version of it. But so everyone was like, well, why are these showing up here? And the reason for that is that Wade Rosen, who now owns Atari, also has a stake in Ziggurat Interactive, which owns the rights to Miner 2049er. And it was one of his favorite games. Big Five Software, that's who I was looking for. It was one of his favorite games. And he said, yeah, we can put that in there. Let's do that. It's just little things like that, right? Like, how cool is that, you know? I just think that's super neat. So you've got little things like that. They're, like I said, they hinted in that podcast as well that if this package did well enough, and apparently it's doing all right, that maybe they could get enough interest from partners to do DLC for third-party games, which would be dope. I would love to see that. So maybe we'll see what happens here. Now we're into the dawning age of PCs. There are PC games, or PCs, Atari home computer games on here. Unfortunately, there are not very many of them. As someone who grew up with an Atari 130XE, I would have loved to have seen more computer representation in here. You know, a lot of people think that when the video game crash, they call it the video game crash of 1983, but it really wasn't. The console industry, and to a lesser degree the arcade industry, experienced a crash in the early 80s. Home computers thrived, and in fact filled the void. That's arguably why home computers got as popular as they did as early as they did. And I feel like that this collection focuses the Atari console and arcade stuff, super important, uber important, but the home computers played a lot bigger role in it than I think they're often given credit for, which is something that kind of bums me out a little bit. So I do wish there was a little bit more of that, but maybe that's something they could expand on later, right? So I'll show you here. This is the computer I owned growing up. My friends had Commodores, we had one of these. This computer was in some ways more capable than a Commodore 64, in some ways not. I am still trying to find one of these for the retro lounge I'm putting together. Finding one that's both working and B, not obscenely expensive is very difficult, because these were not super popular. They were popular enough, but not super popular. One of these days, though, I'm telling you what. And I remember this thing too. It's when they took that computer I just showed you and turned it into a game system that had a keyboard on it. Really weird kind of thing. Atari was famous for making some odd bets sometimes, taking some really interesting creative chances. They frequently didn't work out, but you can never say they didn't put in the effort. And then here's the last era here, which is the 90s and beyond. This is where they talk about the Lynx and the Jaguar principally. I used to have a Jaguar when I was a physical retro collector. It was an absolute bomb of a system. It completely flopped. Most of what came out on it was not good. It was dated when it shipped, but it had some little gems on it. And some of those gems are in this package. Games like Tempest 2000, for example, were in this section. And then it talks a little bit about, this is the Atari VCS, which is the console-ish kind of thing that new Atari recently put out. They talk a little bit about the post-original Atari company, but not very much. And then Wade Rosen here has a little sit-down with Nolan Bushnell. This is way too short. I want the full version of this. Seriously, guys, I really want the full version of that interview, because it looks like an amazing conversation. But like I said, this is the only place right now, I believe, where you can play Lynx and Jaguar games in a legal fashion, and they're perfectly emulated. Everything in this is perfectly emulated. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. There are, unfortunately, a couple of, I'm going to say, creative liberties taken with some of the history in this that kind of bothers me. Not very much, but the one thing that I don't like about this, and maybe there's a reason for it, but they don't do justice in this to the original origin story of the Atari Lynx, which is Atari's attempt at a handheld that came out around the time shortly after the Game Boy. It was the first ever color handheld. It was actually a very capable system, but it wasn't super popular. Thing is, Atari didn't invent this. A long defunct game publisher called Epyx invented this, EPYX. Hence why it's Lynx with an X in it. They invented this system. They were going to ship it, but they hit financial troubles. So they struck a deal with Atari, where Atari would produce the hardware and sell it, and Epyx would produce a lot of the software for it. And indeed, a lot of the Lynx software was developed by Epyx. Epyx is not talked about in this at all. And I don't know why that is, but that's not historically accurate. This was a system that Atari put out, and Atari put a lot of work into, but they did not invent it. They merely took it over from a failing company. And like I said, I don't know why they leave that out, but if you're trying to be historically accurate, that's a thing you gotta do. So unsure about that. I'd love to hear an explanation for that, but yeah, so that's just one little thing. But by and large, the history in here is pretty represented based on what I remember as someone who's pretty in touch with this industry here. So alright, so I'm just going to show you a quick number of selections from each of these different eras that we have. So let's show you for the modernized stuff. I'll show you Yar's Revenge. Again, this is one of my favorite 2600 games. And the thing that Mike Micah said in that podcast that I thought was really, really cool is that while this does have new games and sound, or new sound and graphics and everything else, this is apparently the original 2600 game code running underneath this. So you're playing Yar's Revenge exactly the way it was originally designed by Howard Scott Warshaw, but you are playing with these new graphics and sound, but they did not redo the game logic. So purists of the game, in theory, could play this just as they used to remember and have a perfect time with it. Super, super cool. I really love the look. I love the techno aesthetic. I love the pulsing colors. Just super quality piece all around. I really like it. So, and quick cut there. I was going to show you Vector Sector, which is a mashup of Atari's old Vector arcade games. It takes all the genres and combines them into something new. It does not like my recording software at all. So you'll have to take my word on that one. But that one is really, really cool. So you've also got things here like Neo Breakout. Similar idea. It has really cool... it's a take on the original game with really cool visuals. You know, as you get through this first area here, it'll blow out into a modernized color palette type thing. It's really well done. And considering, as I understand it, this whole package from start to finish was made in like less than a year. Pretty darn impressive what these guys have managed to do here, including writing some of the emulators from scratch, plus these reimagined titles, plus doing all the in-game, all the movies and other stuff like that. Pretty darn cool. So this is Touch Me, which, yeah, this is their little Simon Says type of thing. But, is this interesting? I mean, it's a Simon Says game. These were really popular for a while. I used to play a lot of these as a kid. But how cool is it that they not only emulated the game, but they made it overlay into this high-resolution scan of the device, so you can actually play it looking the way it was originally intended. How neat is that? And if and you can hide the button prompts if you want. This will get old for you after just a few minutes, but it's so neat that it's there. And you can just jump right in and look at the instruction book if you want. See everything that you have here. Most of the games have this. Really, really slick. And then for the arcade stuff, a lot of these are vector games, which is a different type of monitor display technology that allowed for very interesting high refresh rates and very bright graphics. But it's something that you have to emulate because it's an actual different type of display. And they don't make them anymore. So this is something that collectors are actually really after, in fact. So you see how bright it is there? So emulating vectors is something a lot of people have done. It's very hard to do right because you have to try to approximate for the traits of a vector monitor on a type of display technology that has basically, like, vector monitors to CRT monitors are apples to oranges. They really are. So you're really trying to, display an orange on an apple, if you will. It's a terrible analogy, but you know what I'm talking about. So what you can do here is if you go into the options, there's what's called glow, which is, you can see it applies almost like a bloom effect. But basically what this is doing is turning up the intensity of the vector beam. So this probably looks a little bit closer to the way the arcade original did. But if you don't like that or you want to change it around a little bit, you have that option, which is very, very cool. So again, you can view the material when you go in here. You can also stretch out the screen if you want, and you can turn the border on and off, which some people are going to like, some people are not. So this is what it's stretched out here. So yeah, the vector games, they did a very admirable job, in my opinion, in terms of replicating the vector graphics style, which again is something there's no way to do 100% on a modern monitor. You just can't, unfortunately. But they've done a pretty solid job, all things considered. I'm pretty impressed with them, and it is adjustable. Like most of the Digital Eclipse collections, the number of different options that the emulators have are not going to blow your mind compared to something like an M2 collection. M2, I have always said, are incredible for the sheer number of raw options that they put into their collections. And I will never say no to that, but at the same time, those collections are insane. Like, they are full of options that nobody cares about and no one's really going to use. These ones are a little basic, but they cover everything that you would need. So for the vector games, you know, they have those easier, they have those types of options for the intensity and the border art and things like that. All of these games have that. They have the border on and off. You can put a TV scanline filter on them. Scanline snobs are not going to like this a lot because there's only one type. It's either on or off for most of them. Some of them have a little bit more, but, you know, if you're really picky about that, it may not be enough for you. And you can go, you know, full size, original pixel perfect, or stretched widescreen if you're a terrible person. And those are really your options for the most part. They are limited, but it's what you need the most in terms of getting the core experience that you want while maintaining the sort of preservation angle of it. Would it be nice if there was more? Yeah, but I think Digital Eclipse knows what people need the most out of these types of things. And yeah, I'm cool with that, you know. If you're someone who wants the most hardcore, incredibly intricately fine-tuned experience possible, you're probably using an emulator, let's be honest. And they know that. They know you're probably using an emulator. So, you know what? I'm okay with it as they are now. Some people might disagree, but I think for what they're trying to do here, it's fine. So we're still well into the arcade, so let's... the majority of the games in this are 2600 games. Also, a couple of these, which are mostly prototypes, are unlockable. You have to solve riddles to do them. As you can see, I haven't done most of these yet. I intend to, but I haven't gotten around to it yet because some of them are a little... Some of them are a little obtuse. They're not too bad, but some of them are. So, 2600 is the platform definitely most represented in this. Some would say to a bit of a little... The ratio is maybe a little bit high. let's put it that way. But 2600 emulation, long since solved problem. So, you know, these play fine. I mean, literally the smartwatch on my wrist probably has several thousand times more power than a 2600 at a minimum. I'm probably underestimating that. So, you know, if you can't emulate this right, what are you even doing? So they did a pretty good job on that. And again, you can go into the manual, see all these high resolution scans. It's really, 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 really excellent. Now, the other thing as well is that Atari games, the way they made they made up for a lack of ability to put in a lot of really in-depth mechanics in this very small amount of memory they had to work with, is they had what are called variations. There was an option switch on the console that you could flick, and some games had, as you can see, a ridiculous number of different variants that you could choose from, and these were usually detailed in the manual. Some of them changed between 1 and 2 player modes, as you can see here, and some of them would just change the way the game would work. So these are all the different options. It just, you don't have to go and scan through the manual and flick the switch. It just lists them all out in a menu. It shows all the different variants and the different variables that they impact, and you can just choose to play all of the different variants of these old games. A lot of these of other Atari collections didn't have this, or didn't have all of these. And again, they're trying to preserve it properly. You can even switch between color and black and white mode, because black and white, you youngins, you don't even know, man. So black and white TVs were still a thing when this came out in the late 70s. So if you had one of those, you could play in that mode. Oh yeah, old school, my friends. So yeah, everything that has a variant, which is, to be honest, is most of these games, you can go through all of those. And there you are. This is one of the interesting prototype titles that never came out back in the day. And the prototypes are here, and I think it's super cool that these all still exist. And there's a lot of really interesting history here. You know, people are going to say, oh my god, these games look so primitive, how can you possibly even? And you know what? You ain't wrong. These games, by modern standards, look pretty rough. But the history is important here. And there are still some, like, I can still play Yar's Revenge today, and it still mechanically plays so great. And that's what's amazing about these, is that they may look terrible by today's standards, but these games still play amazingly well in many cases. The mechanics of them are still sound. And yeah, that is all replicated here, and that it really gives you a good idea of, again, where games came from and where a lot of the mechanics that we even see today are originating from. You know, the Sword Quest series, I only had this first one. These were incredibly obtuse, difficult, entry-level RPGs, but they were amazing. They took so many hours, and you had to chart things so much to figure out what you needed to do and how to finish them and how to juggle your different items and things like that. But if you could figure it out, you felt so accomplished, and it was really neat. And it was a full RPG on a platform that had almost no memory. There are videos in this where these guys talk about what a nightmare the 2600 was to develop for, because it had so little memory, and there was no such thing as developer kits or everything. Everything was coded in assembler. And a lot of the times by people who never developed anything before they got hired at Atari. You know, crazy, crazy stuff. And it really gives you the opportunity to see that. And then you go into the later Atari systems like the 5200, which was a sequel to it that was actually based on Atari home computer hardware. This thing was a complete flop, largely because of the gods-awful controllers they had with it. They had a 7800, which again was another evolution of that didn't do super well. And but all of those are reflected here. And the thing that's going to interest people a lot is that when people think of most game consoles, they think usually that they existed for more or less 3 to 5 years. Some consoles have lasted longer than that. In fact, newer consoles tend to have longer cycles than that. But a lot of people don't realize that even though it came out in the late 70s, the Atari 2600 in particular was getting new games made for it until the early 90s. Like, we're talking when the NES had already come and gone, and the Super Nintendo and the Genesis were duking it out for supremacy in the North American market. You were still getting games for the 2600 at that point in time. Like, look at the years on these. Here's Basketball for the 7800 from 1990. These systems were so behind the times when these games were getting made, it was almost comical. But they kept making games for it because people still had them and people were buying them. It was a great value system. And because, despite the fact that the games on them were utterly crude by even the standards of, you know, the NES or the Super Nintendo or something like that, they still played great and they were still fun, and they proved that graphics don't make everything. Good graphics are cool. I love games that push the limits of technology, but they didn't have to have that to be good games. And that's an interesting piece of history as well that a lot of people don't realize. You tell people that games are coming out for Atari systems in 1992 or 1991, and they're like, no, you can't be serious about that. Oh yes, we absolutely are. Also, this is a game I missed back in the day, Ninja Golf. If you play nothing else in this collection, you have to play this. Because what is it? It is a ninja who golfs, and in between, you have to shoot your ball, and in between your shots, you have to do ninja battles against gophers and other ninjas who are trying to kill you. How friggin' cool is this? This is the kind of ridiculous concept that you would see come out of the indie space or possibly even the mobile space these days. It's utterly insane, and it's a lot of freaking fun, man, because it's so dumb, and I love it. And this is seriously the game I think you need to play if you don't play any other one in this collection. It's that kind of ridiculous. You know, and this was the thing that was great about Atari, is there was a lot of amazing video games that came out on systems like the NES and the Super Nintendo. Don't get me wrong, I love all that stuff. But for as many creative games as there were there, that was also when a lot of companies started to play it safe and rely on sequels and licensed properties and things like that to a certain degree. There was a lot of innovation on those systems, but there was a lot of playing it safe too. But Atari, they just didn't care. They just, their main mandate was they went to their designers and just went, make something fun. And that was all they had to do. So they came up with sometimes these utterly mad ideas. So, Future Parallax here, and I totally forgot to showcase one of the most important games in here while we were doing this. So this is Star Raiders. So, okay, I'm not going to be able to show you guys this properly because this game was insane back in the day. If you think of games like Elite Dangerous or other hardcore space exploration games like that, that's what this was back in the day. And well, what was crazy about it is that it not only had an incredible number of different options, it had, well, this thing. So there were versions of this on the Atari home computer, as well as the 2600 and the 5200. And on the Atari home computer, this wasn't a big deal because you had a keyboard. On these systems, you had this separate device, well, on the 2600 was a separate device, to control all the different options of your ship, because this was a full spaceship simulator thing. And it's kind of insane. So what's cool about this is this one actually has multiple different modes. You can play the original mode, you can play what's called an enhanced mode, which has better music and I think some better graphics, I'm not sure, and then enhanced and overclock, which makes the game run better because the original version struggled a little bit, shall we say. And what you can do with this is Digital Eclipse did a kind of crazy thing here. So what they did is they took all of those different options that they had, or all those different buttons that they had, and they put them on a combination of modern controller buttons, which is good for a lot of them, but still wasn't enough for everything that the game had. So for the things that didn't have that, so, well, one, they put in this really awesome overlay that has all these lights on it to show you what modes you're in and things like that, which obviously you didn't have back on those systems. And in addition, you can hold the right stick if you're using a controller to bring up this neat little wheel that allows you to change your different views around. This game was incredibly complicated. It still is to this day, and at the time it was really crazy complicated. But you could do so much in this, and it had an amazing sense of exploration to it. I actually had this for the 2600, and I never got very far in it before I lost patience, but there was so many cool things you could do in this, and yeah, they've actually modernized the controls, and they modernized the graphics to a certain point. You know, it's got the different music as well as so this is what the enhanced mode looks like, or the original mode, I should say. The enhanced mode includes the cool border with the lights, and then there's the overclock mode, which makes the game just run better overall. And this is something they put a lot of effort into because for a lot of people at old school Atari, this was their favorite game. So, and in no small part because of the complexity of it. But this was something that would have been very hard to make work on modern systems, especially modern consoles. And I think it is so cool that they put in all this extra effort into this one particular game to make it work in a way that was accessible to modern players while still keeping all of the things that made it so neat and that made it so unique and different for back in the day. And a prime example of why Atari took some really amazing Garbage Scout Captain, and why Atari took some amazing creative risks back in the day. So this is one it would have been a crime to leave out of the collection, or to leave out of my showcase here. So I wanted to show this to you guys. But yeah, this is one you definitely want to check out and give a crack to if you try out this collection. Now, some people might be asking about some less than great pivotal moments in Atari's history. For example, games like E.T., the game that ended up largely getting buried in the desert. In fact, there's a video in here that talks about that exactly. You're not going to find that here, for one simple reason. It's licensed. It's not that they don't want to show it, it's that they'd have to pay a phenomenal amount of money to get the license, to the ET license from Amblin Entertainment to be able to put the game in here. And as nice as this collection is, I'm certain it wasn't made on a huge budget, so they were limited in what they could do. Yes, ET is important from a historical perspective, but bro, you don't want to play it. You really don't. It's terrible. It's terrible. You don't want it. You don't want it. Trust me. So, and you can find that any number of places if you want to. So, yeah, so here we are into the Lynx. They're a portable system. You know, you can emulate a Lynx pretty well, but it can sometimes be a tricky system to emulate well, only because the Lynx had a very, very, very tiny screen, right? And it's tricky to, in some cases, to emulate that well, because some of the emulators, at least the ones I used to use, didn't scale super well. So if you blew them up to the full size of your TV, it would be a little gnarly. This does a really good job of making the Lynx screen look good. I mean, look at the quality of this Lynx overlay that it puts in here. So, as you can see, the Lynx was a very tiny screen, but it actually scales it up really well here. And you have this great eye candy surrounding it to give you an idea what that's like. But you can blow it up to full screen if you want to, right? And there's the filter, the LCD filter, which is more how the Lynx screen would look, but you can turn that off if you want it to be a little sharper, you know, and you can blow it up, but if you do that, yeah, it's going to look pretty gnarly because you're blowing up. I forget what the resolution of the Lynx was, but it was tiny. So, you know, you're asking a lot in that situation, right? But yeah, you've got these and it works great. I wish there was more Lynx games on here. Unfortunately, these are the in-house Atari ones. Epix developed most of the software for the Lynx, as we talked about earlier, and I have no clue who owns the Epix IP anymore. I'm sure it's all scattered to the wind, so that would have been too difficult. And there's also, unfortunately, a very limited number of home computer games on here. Only this tiny handful. I really think they could have done more in terms of showcasing the home computer stuff that was on here. I think they really could have done. Atari has a lot of stuff on here, a lot of stuff available for these home machines that they didn't really show. And though they dedicate a whole section to it, I really don't think Atari did. I don't think they did a great job in this collection of showcasing their computers. And even though they do a whole section talking about them, I do feel like that the computers kind of got short shrift in this. They didn't really, there's not a lot of games in here. They only do a handful of titles from the 400 and 800 line. Nothing from the Atari ST, which was their 16-bit Amiga competitor, that was a very important system that was very popular in Europe. That's not talked about here at all, or there's no games here that you can play at all. That's a bit of a that's unfortunate. You know, I'm a bit bummed about that. But yes, the Jaguar, arguably Atari's biggest failure of all, and a system that you can't play in emulation very well these days, but you can here. I do wish again that there was more games for it in here, but this is an in-house written emulator apparently. And it works fantastic. So this was an early 3D system. It actually did come out before the N64 and PlayStation. So as rudimentary as it looks, this was reasonably impressive 3D at the time. But it's also a system that Atari was a company in trouble when they were developing this. So this is a game that this is a system that was made on a shoestring budget by a desperate company, and it shows. They weren't able to get developers behind it. They weren't able to give their in-house developers the resources they needed in order to make good stuff for it. And by the time the system came out, it was already kind of dated. And it just never stood a chance. And it was shelved after a couple of years, selling only a couple 100,000 units. And that is when the old Atari, as we call it, basically ceased to exist. But most of these games are not good. A couple of them are really good. Example, Tempest 2000, which some people say this is made by the legendary Jeff Minter. And some say this is not only the best Jaguar game, that this is the best Tempest game. And you can make an argument for that. You absolutely could. Jeff Minter is a wizard who does incredible work, and these really trippy, these games that always have these really trippy visuals and are mechanically really, really good. And I think without a doubt, this is the best Jaguar game. It definitely takes the most advantage of the hardware. It runs the best, and it still plays great. And I mean, I love Tempest, so it is a great time. And because it was made for a home console, it doesn't actually require a trackball in order to play well, which is always a nice touch. So yeah, being able to see all this stuff in here is really cool. There actually is a Tempest 4000 that's out for the Xbox One, the PS4, and the PC, and maybe the Switch. I'm not sure. The PC version is apparently pretty bad, and you don't want it. But Tempest 4000 is actually a pretty good game. It's really this game, but modernized further. And yeah, I enjoy it a lot. It's really cool to see this made to a wider audience. It's cool to see the Jaguar in general become available to a wider audience. It was a flop of a system. It wasn't a very good system, and frankly, most of the games on it were not that great. But it doesn't matter whether a system was good or bad. Preservation is important. And there was cool stuff on this. And I'm happy to see it represented here. The only complaint I honestly have for the most part, other than getting the origin story of the Lynx a bit wrong and not showcasing enough of the home computers, is that I just wish there were more games. And, I understand this game was made by, modern Atari is not a big company, and Digital Eclipse is not a big company. And I understand that this was made in a very short amount of time on probably a pretty limited budget. I think they did a fantastic job for that. But they have said that maybe if there was enough interest, they could try to get the rights to do some DLC for more games. I hope this is doing well enough to do that, because there's a lot more they could show here. I would have, as expensive as this collection is, and it is a little pricey, I'm not going to lie, I would still happily pay more to get not just more games, but more historical content about those games. More videos, more scanned artwork, more assets, stuff like that. I'd love to see this be something that continues to expand and grow. I think that would be great to see a collection like this that evolves rather than just stays in a fixed state when it ships, which is how basically all of them do. But yeah, overall, aside from those couple of omissions, I think this collection's great. Do I think it's worth the money? I think it is for me, absolutely. The timeline stuff alone makes this worth the money for me. For you, if you're someone who's into gaming history, you should absolutely get it. If you're someone who wants to know more about the origins of gaming, I think you should get it, though maybe the price is a little steep for you and you might want to wait for a sale. That's up to you. If you're just a casual player, honestly, there's no one I can't recommend at least check this out. The price point at which you feel comfortable doing so is going to be up to you. But I think this is one of the best, if not the best, retro collection ever made. So much love and care was put into this, was put into showcasing everything in the best light possible, to getting these interviews, to talking to these people, and to really showing what was just so amazing about the early origins of video games. Digital Eclipse puts out a lot of good collections, but like one of the criticisms I had about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Cowabunga collection was that it was kind of lacking on the history front. It didn't really have a lot of it didn't have a lot of video interviews and things like that I would have loved to have seen. There was probably reasons for that, but nonetheless, it's something I would really have loved to have seen more of. And my hope is that this collection succeeds well enough that it not only makes more developers and publishers interested in working with Digital Eclipse for their own collections, but it shows these older game devs and game industry figures that people want to hear them talk. People want to hear their stories. People want to hear them talk about making these old games, and that this isn't just a thing. This isn't a thing nobody cares about anymore. People are passionate about this stuff. I'm passionate about this stuff. And it's something that we need to see more of this stuff, because these older games and systems, even the common ones, are getting harder to find these days, and they're getting expensive enough that most average people can't participate in them. And yeah, emulators are out there, but emulators are an enthusiast thing. They're not easy for everybody to do. And a lot of people aren't going to seek that stuff out necessarily. They may like it and enjoy it if it's put in front of them, but they're not going to actively go searching for it. And this solves all of those problems, honestly. And it does it in a way that's respectful to the source material, that is clearly not just a cash grab, and that is showing people why this is important, and it's showing the faces behind it. And the fact that video games are not made in a vacuum. They're made by incredibly talented people who were, in the case of these people, were working on something they had no knowledge of before they came in. And they just figured it all out, and they made what is now the most powerful and biggest entertainment industry in the world. Bigger than Hollywood, bigger than music, bigger than anything else. This is where it started. And these people are the reason and the impetus that we have what we have today. And yeah, like I said, this collection is not only fun, it's important. And I really hope it does well enough that we can see more things like it. So this was a long video, but there was a lot to talk about here. That is Atari 50. It's out everywhere, and I really do recommend it. I know the price may be a little steep for some people, and I can't say you're wrong for that, but I really do think this is something that needs to succeed, and that I am excited to see where this leads us to. If this succeeds and Digital Eclipse can get more interest from other companies, where this could lead us to. I am super excited about that. So thank you very much for watching, everybody. I do appreciate it. If you like what you saw here, please do all the normal YouTube things, like, subscribe, hit the bell. As I said before, leave a comment down below. Tell me what you think about this collection. And what other platforms and companies would you love to see get this treatment? I want to see a title collection done like this. Ooh, get on that, Digital Eclipse. But let me know who else you'd like to see represented in this type of form. I think that would be really cool. And as always, you can follow me over at twitch.tv/pxabstraction for multiple variety streams a week. I cover indie games as well as other retro things over there, including stuff better suited to streaming than YouTube. We have a fantastic community there, and I would love to see you be a part of it. Thank you again all, and I'll see you on the next Retro Ramble. You folks have yourselves a good one. Take her easy.